Here is a silence between stars that the young races never truly understand. It is not the absence of sound. Space has always been silent. It is something deeper, something older. It is the weight of time itself, pressing down upon the void, compressing eons into the cold distance between one flickering light and the next. The Kethvari had sailed that silence for 11,000 years. They had watched empires rise from dust, burn bright with ambition, and crumble back into the nothing from which they came. They had catalogued the births and deaths of species, the way a gardener might note the seasons. They had grown old, not just as individuals, but as a civilization, old and tired and certain of their place in the cosmic order. Vathara remembered when certainty had been a comfort. She stood now at the observation portal of the refugee carrier Whisper of Ages, watching the stars drift past like funeral candles. Her reflection stared back at her, 4 eyes dim with exhaustion, the silver filaments of her cranial crest lying flat against her skull in a posture of defeat she could not bring herself to correct. 300 years she had served as a cultural liaison to the galactic concord. 300 years of smiling at younger races, of gently correcting their misconceptions, of representing the wisdom of a people who had seen everything and feared nothing. Now she feared everything. The door behind her whispered open, and she did not turn. She knew the footsteps. Counselor Mathan, his gait heavy with the weight of decisions that had killed billions.
"You should rest," he said. "I have rested," Vathara replied. "I rested while Velcora burned. I rested while the 7th Fleet died screaming in the void. I have had enough rest, Counselor."
He moved to stand beside her, his own reflection joining hers in the transparent alloy. Once, Mathan had been magnificent, tall even by Kethvari standards, his scales a deep cobalt that spoke of noble lineage. Now those scales had dulled to gray, and the spines along his shoulders drooped like wilted flowers. "The enemy has taken the Pyrean cluster," he said quietly. 12 worlds, 40 billion souls. Vathara closed her upper eyes, keeping only her lower pair fixed on the stars. 40 billion. The number should have staggered her. It should have driven her to her knees. Instead, it simply settled into the growing pit within her chest, joining the other numbers, the other losses, the other worlds.
"How many ships remain?"
17 capital vessels, perhaps 200 support craft. The 3rd and 5th fleets are gone. The 8th is scattered. We do not know how many survived the retreat from Velcora.
"And the other races of the Concord?"
Mathan's silence was answer enough.
"They will not help us," Vathara said. It was not a question.
"The Threlkai have sealed their borders. The Vornathi claim neutrality. The Asari are already negotiating terms of submission." His voice cracked on the last word. "We taught them, Vathara. We guided them through their first steps into the stars. We held their hands while they learned to walk among the void. And now?"
"Now they see which way the wind blows." Vathara finally turned from the window. "I do not blame them, Mathan. We would do the same. We have done the same in ages past."
"That was different." "Was it?"
He had no answer for that. They stood in silence for a long moment, 2 remnants of a dying people, watching the stars that had once been their birthright slip further and further away. Somewhere out there, the enemy was moving.
The Veilthrix, a name that had become a curse, a whisper of extinction. They had emerged from the galactic core just 18 months ago, and in that time they had done what no force in recorded history had ever accomplished. They had brought the Kethvari to their knees.
"There is one option," Maithan said at last. "One we have not yet explored."
I know what you are going to say.
"The humans."
No.
Vathara.
I said no. She turned to face him fully, her 4 eyes blazing with something that might have been anger or might have been shame. "We cast them out, Mathan. 40 years ago, we stood before the Concord and declared them unfit for membership. Dangerous, we called them, unstable, a species too young and too violent to be trusted with the gifts of civilization."
We were wrong.
"Were we?"
Vathara laughed, and there was no humor in it. They had been among the stars for less than 3 centuries. They fought wars among themselves. They built weapons that made the Concord recoil in horror. They survived.
The word hung in the air between them. Everything we threw at them, Mython continued, his voice soft. The trade embargoes, the diplomatic isolation, the technological blockades. We tried to contain them, to slow their growth, to force them into compliance, and they simply adapted. They built their own trade networks. They developed their own technologies. They found ways around every obstacle we placed in their path.
That proves nothing.
It proves everything. Mathan reached into his robes and produced a data slate, pressing it into her hands. "Look at this. Look at it and tell me we have another choice."
Vathara looked down at the slate. It displayed a star map, a simple thing, the kind she had studied since childhood. But the data overlaid upon it made her blood run cold.
Human territory.
40 years ago, when they had been expelled from the Concord, the humans had controlled perhaps 30 star systems, insignificant, a backwater, a footnote in galactic politics.
Now they held over 200.
"That's not possible," she whispered. "That rate of expansion, it's not possible."
And yet it is. Mathan tapped the slate, bringing up more data. They call it the Soul Compact now. 217 systems, with infrastructure in another 43. Population estimates range from 100 billion to, well, we're not entirely sure. They don't share census data.
How? How could they grow so quickly? The resources alone.
They don't build the way we build, Vathera. They don't expand the way we expand. They're different. They always were. We just refuse to see it.
Vathara stared at the map, watching the blue dots that represented human systems spread across the galactic arm like a quiet infection. No, not an infection. Something else. Something more deliberate.
"The Veilthrix will reach our core worlds within 6 months," Mathan said. "The homeworld itself in 8. If we are to survive as a people, we need allies, and the humans are the only ones who might still help us."
They have no reason to.
"No," Mathan agreed. "They don't. But they are our only hope, and someone must ask."
The Thara understood. She was the cultural liaison, or she had been, when there was still a culture left to liaise. She was the one who had stood before the Concord Assembly and delivered the speech that had condemned humanity to exile. The words had not been hers, but the voice had been. The face had been.
"You want me to beg?"
"I want you to give us a chance." She looked at the map for a long time. 217 systems, 100 billion souls. A civilization they had tried to strangle in its cradle, now grown beyond anything they could have imagined.
"Prepare a shuttle," she said at last,
And find me everything we have on human diplomatic protocols. Everything."
Mathan nodded and left without another word.
Vaithara turned back to the window, to the stars, to the silence between them. Somewhere out there, humanity was waiting. She wondered if they remembered her face. She wondered if they remembered her words. She wondered if they would let her finish speaking before they turned her away.
The journey to human space took 11 days.
11 days of silence and worry, and the slow, gnawing fear that she was already too late. Reports filtered in through the communication relays, the Ninth Fleet engaged and destroyed, another 6 worlds fallen, the Veilthrix pushing deeper into Kethvari territory with a speed that defied tactical logic. They did not conquer in the traditional sense. They did not occupy or subjugate. They simply eliminated. Every world they took fell silent within hours. Every population center went dark. Billions of lives snuffed out like candle flames in a hurricane. Vaithara spent most of the journey in her quarters, reviewing human history. It was not a pleasant experience. She had studied humans before, of course. Everyone in the Concord had. They were a curiosity, a case study in what happened when a species advanced too quickly. They had discovered fire only 200,000 years ago. They had reached their own moon less than 5 centuries before making first contact. They had industrialized, computerized, and achieved faster-than-light travel in a single, frantic burst of progress that had left the rest of the galaxy stunned and unsettled.
But it was their history before the stars that truly disturbed her. Wars. Endless wars, fought over land and resources and ideology, and sometimes nothing at all. Genocides that had killed millions. Weapons that could shatter cities in an instant. They had built nuclear arsenals capable of ending their entire civilization, and then lived with those arsenals for generations, each day a dice roll between survival and extinction.
And they had survived. That was the part that Vaithara could not understand. That was the part that kept her awake at night, staring at the ceiling of her small cabin while the stars streaked past. Every other species the Kethvari had encountered followed the same pattern. They achieved a certain level of technology, faced certain existential challenges, and either resolved those challenges peacefully or destroyed themselves. It was the great filter, the silent test that separated the species who reached the stars from those who died on their birth worlds. Humans had not passed that test. They had not solved their conflicts. They had not achieved the peaceful enlightenment that marked a mature civilization. They had simply endured. They had built their doomsday weapons, and they had not used them, not out of wisdom, not out of enlightenment, but out of pure, stubborn refusal to die. They had stared into the abyss of their own extinction, and they had blinked first, again and again and again, not because they were better than their worst impulses, but because they wanted to live more than they wanted to win. It was, Vaithara thought, the most terrifying thing she had ever read. On the 12th day, the shuttle dropped out of FTL at the edge of human space, and Vaithara got her first look at what humanity had built in 40 years of exile. She had expected something grand, something ostentatious. Every species she had ever encountered, when given freedom and resources, built monuments to their own greatness. The Threlkai had their crystal spires, the Asari had their living ships, grown from engineered coral. The Kethvari themselves had their temple stations, vast constructs of silver and light that hung in the void like the jewelry of gods. The human station was none of these things. It was utilitarian, functional,
a massive cylinder of gray metal, rotating slowly around its central axis, studded with communication arrays and docking ports, and what her tactical systems identified as defensive emplacements. It was not beautiful. It was not meant to be beautiful. It was meant to work.
And it was enormous.
Vathara checked her sensors twice, certain there had to be an error. The station was over 40 kilometers long. It could have held the entire population of a Kethvari colony world. It could have housed fleets.
A voice crackled through her communication system, startling her from her reverie.
Unidentified vessel, this is Sol Compact Station Meridian. Please transmit identification and state your purpose.
The voice was calm, professional, utterly without threat or hostility. Somehow, that made it worse.
"This is Cultural Liaison Vathara of the Kethvari Remnant," she replied, hoping her voice did not tremble. "I am here as an envoy, seeking an audience with your governing authority."
There was a pause, a long pause.
Acknowledged, Cultural Liaison. Please hold your current position. An escort will be dispatched to guide you to a docking berth.
Understood. I thank you for receiving me.
Another pause. Then, with what might have been a hint of warmth,
You're welcome, Liaison. Meridian Control out.
Vathara sat in silence, watching the station grow larger in her viewport. She had expected hostility. She had expected cold refusal, accusations, perhaps even weapons lock. She had been prepared for all of that.
she had not been prepared for courtesy.
The escort arrived within minutes, a small patrol craft that fell into position beside her shuttle with practiced ease. The pilot did not speak, simply transmitted a navigation path and waited for Vathara to follow. She did, guiding her shuttle through the maze of traffic that surrounded the station.
And there was traffic. So much traffic. Freighters, transports, mining vessels, military craft. They moved in orderly streams, following paths that must have been coordinated by some central authority, never colliding, never hesitating. It was like watching the circulatory system of some vast organism, blood cells flowing through arteries of light and metal. The docking berth they assigned her was deep within the station, past layers of security checkpoints that scanned her shuttle with equipment she did not recognize. The Kethvari had been masters of sensor technology for millennia, and yet these human devices saw things she could not identify. It was humbling. It was also, she admitted to herself, a little frightening. When she finally stepped off her shuttle, she found two humans waiting for her. They were smaller than she remembered. Humans always looked smaller in person than they did in recordings. Fragile, almost. Soft skin, no scales, no armor, no natural defenses. They had evolved on a world where they were not the apex predators, and it showed in every line of their bodies. But their eyes... Vathara had forgotten about their eyes. The humans who waited for her looked at her with eyes that held no malice, no fear, no uncertainty. They looked at her the way her own people looked at interesting specimens. They looked at her the way old things looked at young things. It was impossible. Humans were barely children by galactic standards. They had no right to look at her like that. And yet they did. Cultural Liaison Vathara, the taller of the two, said. A female, Vathara thought, though human gender markers still confused her. I'm Commander Sarah Chen. This is my colleague, Dr. Marcus Webb. Welcome to Meridian. Thank you for receiving me. Vathara replied, falling back on the formal phrases she had rehearsed 1,000 times on the journey. I come in peace, seeking dialogue between our peoples. Of course. Commander Chen smiled, a baring of teeth that Vathara had to remind herself was a gesture of friendliness among humans. If you'll follow us, we've prepared quarters for you. I imagine you'd like to rest before any formal discussions.
Yes, thank you. But I must stress that time is of the essence. My people.
We know. The doctor spoke for the first time. His voice was softer than the commander's, but there was something in it that made Vithara's scales prickle. We've been monitoring the situation, the Veilthrix advance, the fall of the Parian cluster, the destruction of your fleets.
Vithara's hearts lurched. You know of the Veilthrix?
We know a great many things, Liaison. Dr. Webb gestured toward a corridor leading deeper into the station. Please, this way. We have much to discuss. They walked in silence through corridors that thrummed with quiet activity. Humans passed them at regular intervals, workers, soldiers, civilians, and each one glanced at Vithara with the same curious, measuring look. None of them showed hostility, none of them showed fear. They simply observed. The quarters they provided were comfortable, if Spartan. A sleeping platform, a workstation, a viewport that looked out on the stars. Everything she needed, nothing she didn't.
The Diplomatic Council will meet with you tomorrow, Commander Chen said as Vithara surveyed the room. Get some rest. Eat something. There's a food synthesizer by the door. It should have Kethvari nutritional profiles on file. You have our nutritional data?
We have a lot of data, Liaison. Chen's smile didn't waver. We've had 40 years to prepare.
The words should have been threatening. They should have carried the weight of grudge and vengeance. Instead, they sounded almost casual, as if humanity's long exile had been nothing more than an inconvenience.
Vithara thought about the expansion map. 217 systems, 100 billion souls.
Commander, she said as Chen turned to leave, may I ask you a question?
Of course.
The embargo, the isolation, the years of exclusion. Are you not angry? Chen paused at the door. For a long moment she said nothing. Then she turned back, and Vithara saw something in her eyes that she could not name. Angry? Chen repeated the word slowly, as if testing its weight. No, Liaison, we're not angry. We were once, a long time ago. But anger is exhausting, and we had work to do. Work? Building, growing, preparing. Chen's smile softened into something almost sad. Your people told us we weren't ready for the galaxy, that we were too young, too violent, too dangerous. And you know what? You were right. We weren't ready, so we got ready. She left before Vithara could respond.
Vithara did not sleep that night.
She stood at the viewport instead, watching the traffic flow past, watching the lights of human ships move in their careful patterns. She thought about Commander Chen's words. She thought about Dr. Webb's knowing eyes. She thought about the 40 years her people had spent congratulating themselves on containing the human threat, while the humans themselves had been preparing. For what? The question haunted her. When morning came, or what passed for morning on a station with no natural sun, she was escorted to a conference room deep in Meridian's administrative core. The room was simple: a long table, several chairs, screens on the walls displaying data she could not read. 5 humans waited for her, 3 women and 2 men, all watching her with that same quiet, measuring gaze. One of them rose as she entered. He was older than the others, his hair gray at the temples, lines carved deep around his eyes. But those eyes were sharp, clear, missing nothing. Cultural Liaison Vithara, he said. I'm Director Samuel Okonkwo. On behalf of the Seoul Compact Diplomatic Council, welcome. Thank you, Director. Vithara took the seat they indicated, folding her hands carefully on the table. I wish we were meeting under better circumstances. As do we. Okonkwo resumed his seat.
We understand you've come to request assistance against the Veilthrix?
There was no point in pretense. Yes, my people face extinction. The Veilthrix cannot be reasoned with, cannot be negotiated with. They seek nothing less than our complete annihilation. We have nowhere else to turn.
And the galactic concord? The other races who once stood beside you?
Vaethra felt her scales flush with shame. They have withdrawn their support. Some seek neutrality. Others have already begun negotiating their own survival.
Survival. One of the women spoke, a sharp-featured individual with close-cropped hair and military insignia on her collar. That's an interesting choice of words. The Asari are negotiating survival. The Vornathi are negotiating survival. What exactly are the Veilthrix offering them?
I don't understand.
We've been watching the Veilthrix for some time, Liaison, long before they emerged from the galactic core. They don't negotiate. They don't make deals. They consume. So when you say these other races are negotiating their survival, what do you really mean?
Vaethra hesitated. The truth was something she had not wanted to admit, even to herself. They are stalling. They believe that if they are not aggressive, if they offer no resistance, the Veilthrix will turn their attention elsewhere first. They are hoping to buy time.
By sacrificing you.
Yes.
The humans exchanged glances. Some silent communication passed between them, a language of subtle expressions and micro-movements that Vaethra could not read.
And yet, Director Okonkwo said slowly, 40 years ago, your people stood before the Galactic Concord and argued that humanity should be contained, isolated, denied the technologies and trade relationships that might have helped us grow. You called us dangerous.
I know. I was there. I delivered that speech.
The silence that followed was absolute.
I know you remember, Vaethra continued, forcing the words out despite the shame that threatened to choke her. I know you must hate me, hate all of us for what we did. We were afraid. Your species grew so fast, changed so quickly. You built weapons that could destroy worlds, and you spoke of them casually as if they were normal. We thought, we believed.
You believed we were monsters, Dr. Webb said quietly. He sat at the far end of the table, watching her with those ancient eyes. Young monsters, perhaps, untrained, but monsters nonetheless.
Yes. And now? Vaethra looked at the humans arrayed before her. 5 individuals, representing a civilization of billions. A civilization that had been cast out, abandoned, left to fend for itself in the cold dark of space. A civilization that should have been bitter, angry, vengeful. A civilization that had instead grown beyond anything she could have imagined.
Now, I am not sure what you are, she admitted, but I know what you are not. You are not the primitives we dismissed. You are not the savages we feared. You are something else, something I do not fully understand. Director Okonkwo leaned forward. Tell us about the Veilthrix, Liaison. Not the official reports, we have those. Tell us what you've seen, what you've felt. Help us understand what we're dealing with.
And so Vaethra told them. She told them about the first contact 18 months ago, when a Veilthrix swarm had emerged from the galactic core and obliterated a Kethvari research station without warning or communication. She told them about the battles that followed, each one more desperate than the last, as fleet after fleet was thrown against an enemy that seemed to have no weaknesses, no vulnerabilities, no capacity for mercy.
She told them about Velcora. Velcora had been a paradise world,
a garden planet at the heart of Kethvari space, home to 3 billion souls and the greatest cultural archives in the galaxy. The 7th Fleet had died defending it. 48 capital ships and 600 support craft, the largest naval engagement in Kethvari history.
They had held for 6 hours. When the Veilthrix broke through, they did not land troops. They did not demand surrender. They simply began feeding. Their ships descended on the population centers like a plague of locusts, stripping the world of life with a thoroughness that bordered on the surgical. When they left, 12 hours later, there was nothing remaining but empty cities and silence. 3 billion souls gone in a day.
The humans listened without interruption. Their faces revealed nothing. No shock, no horror, no disgust. They simply absorbed the information, processed it, filed it away.
When Vaithara finished, her voice hoarse from speaking, Director Okonkwo simply nodded.
Thank you, Liaison. We appreciate your candor.
Will you help us? The question hung in the air. Vaithara felt her hearts pounding in her chest, felt the weight of her entire species pressing down on her shoulders. Everything came down to this moment, this answer.
That is not a decision we can make today, Okonkwo said. We need to consult with our government, our military, our people. This would not be a small commitment. The Veilthrix are a threat unlike any we've faced before.
Every day you deliberate, more of my people die. We understand. The woman with the military insignia spoke again. But we've learned, Liaison, that rushing into conflicts without proper preparation leads to disasters. We will not throw lives away on sentiment.
Then what will you throw lives away for?
The question came out sharper than Vaithara intended, born of desperation and exhaustion. She regretted it immediately. This was not the way to win allies. But the humans seemed unfazed.
Survival, Dr. Webb said simply. Our own survival. The survival of others when we can manage it, but survival above all.
The Veilthrix will not stop with us. Surely you understand that. Once we are gone, they will turn to other prey, the Thrillkai, the Asari, and eventually...
Eventually, humanity. Okonkwo nodded. Yes, we've considered that possibility. It factors into our calculations.
Calculations. Vaithara laughed, a bitter sound. You speak of calculations while my people burn. You speak of considerations while worlds die. Is this what you learned in your 40 years of exile, to calculate while the galaxy falls? The room fell silent. Vaithara knew she had gone too far, knew she should apologize, should grovel, should do whatever it took to secure their help. But the words would not come. The shame and the fear and the exhaustion of the past months had worn through her diplomatic facade, leaving only the raw wound beneath. And then, to her astonishment, Director Okonkwo smiled.
There she is, he said softly. The real Vaithara. Not the cultural liaison, not the diplomatic mask. The person.
I don't understand.
We've been waiting for you to stop performing. Okonkwo leaned back in his chair. You came here expecting hostility, so you prepared to be conciliatory. You expected demands, so you prepared to beg. But that's not what we want from you, liaison. We don't want your submission. We don't want your shame.
Then what do you want?
The truth, Dr. Webb spoke, and his voice was gentle now, almost kind. We want you to tell us the truth, not what you think we want to hear, not what will win our favor, just the truth.
Can you do that?
Bathara stared at him, at all of them. 5 humans, 5 pairs of eyes, watching her with something that might have been patience, or might have been pity.
Or might have been understanding.
The truth, she repeated slowly. The truth is that I am terrified. The truth is that my people are dying and I can do nothing to stop it. The truth is that I have spent 300 years believing we were the wisest, the most advanced, the most worthy. And now I stand before a species we dismissed as children, begging for help against an enemy we cannot defeat.
She took a shuddering breath. The truth is that I don't know if you will help us. I don't know if you should. We treated you terribly. We tried to hold you back, to keep you small, to prevent you from becoming what you have become. If our positions were reversed, if your positions were reversed, you would let us burn. Commander Chen spoke from the doorway. Vathara had not heard her enter. That's what you're thinking, isn't it? That if humanity came to the Kethvari for help, you would turn them away.
Yes.
Why? The question caught Vathara off guard. Because that is how the galaxy works. The strong survive, the weak perish. Alliances are formed out of mutual benefit, not sentiment. There is no profit in saving a dying species.
No profit, Chen repeated. She moved to stand beside Director Okonkwo, her arms folded across her chest. You're right, there isn't. By every practical calculation, helping your people is a losing proposition. You have little left to offer us, your technology is advanced, but we've already reverse-engineered most of it from salvage. Your star charts are useful, but we have our own surveys. Your cultural archives are impressive, but we have our own history to preserve.
Vathara felt her hope crumbling. Then you will not help us.
I didn't say that. Chen smiled, that same unsettling baring of teeth. You see, liaison, the thing about humans is that we're not very good at calculations. We never have been. We're emotional creatures, irrational, prone to making decisions that don't make practical sense. I don't understand. Of course you don't. Your people have lived for 11,000 years. You've evolved beyond emotion, beyond sentiment, beyond all the messy, illogical impulses that drive young species to do foolish things. Chen's eyes met Vathara's, and there was something fierce in them now. But we haven't. We're still the same foolish, stubborn, irrational creatures we've always been. And one of our most irrational impulses is this. We really, really hate bullies. The room shifted. Vathara felt it, a subtle change in the air, a tension that had not been there before. The humans were still watching her, but their expressions had changed. There was something harder in them now, something cold.
The Veilthrix are bullies, Chen continued. They attack those who cannot fight back. They consume the weak. They spread across the galaxy like a disease, destroying everything in their path because they can, because no one has ever stopped them.
No one can stop them, Vathara whispered. We tried. Our fleets were the most powerful in the galaxy. Our technology was the most advanced, and they broke us like we were nothing. Your technology was the most advanced 40 years ago, Dr. Webb said quietly. Things have changed. Liaison. A great many things have changed. Vathara looked at him, looked at all of them, and for the first time she asked the question that had been burning in her mind since she arrived.
What are you?
The humans exchanged glances. Some silent communication passed between them, and then Director Okonkwo nodded.
Show her, he said.
They took her to the heart of the station. Commander Chen led the way, guiding Vaithara through corridors that grew wider and more heavily trafficked as they descended. The walls here were reinforced. Vaithara could tell from the way her footsteps echoed, and armed humans stood at regular intervals, watching them pass with those same quiet, measuring eyes. Finally, they emerged into a vast chamber. Vaithara stopped. She could not help it. The sight before her was simply too vast, too impossible to process while moving. The chamber was a hollow sphere, kilometers in diameter, and it was filled with ships. Human ships. They hung in careful formation, arrayed in concentric rings around a central core. Cruisers, battleships, carriers, vessels of every size and configuration bristling with weapons she did not recognize. Some were sleek and angular, designed for speed. Others were massive and blocky, clearly built for endurance. All of them were dark, powered down, waiting, but Vaithara could feel the potential energy in them. They were coiled springs, ready to unwind. "How many?" she breathed. "In this chamber? Approximately 400. Chen's voice was casual, as if she were discussing the weather. "This is Battle Group Meridian, one of 37 currently stationed throughout the Sol Compact."
Vaithara's mind reeled.
37 battle groups, 400 ships each. That was nearly 15,000 capital vessels, more than the Kethvari had fielded at the height of their power. "That's not possible," she said. "The resources alone, the construction time." "We've been building for 40 years, Liaison. What else were we supposed to do?" Vaithara turned to stare at Chen. You knew this was coming. The Veilthrix." "We knew something was coming." Chen's expression was unreadable. "We didn't know what or when, but we knew the galaxy wasn't as safe as the Concord pretended. We knew that eventually something would emerge that couldn't be reasoned with, couldn't be negotiated with. So we prepared." "But why? You were exiled, cast out. You had no obligation to protect anyone but yourselves." Chen was quiet for a long moment. When she spoke again, her voice was softer. "I'm going to tell you a story, Liaison. A human story. One that might help you understand." She moved to stand beside Vaithara, both of them gazing out at the silent fleet. "Once, about 300 years before we reached the stars, there was a great war on our world, the greatest war our species had ever fought. Millions died, nations were shattered, entire peoples were nearly wiped from existence by those who believed themselves superior."
"I have read about this war."
"Then you know how it ended. The aggressors were defeated. Their leaders were captured, tried, executed. Their ideologies were crushed, and the rest of the world looked at the devastation and said, 'Never again.'"
"A common sentiment after great conflicts. My own people have said similar things."
"Yes, but here's the difference." Chen turned to face her. "We meant it, not as a sentiment, not as a wish, as a promise. We built institutions to prevent it from happening again. We created alliances, treaties, systems of mutual defense. We made ourselves responsible for each other, even when it was inconvenient, even when it was costly, even when it would have been easier to look away."
"And did it work?"
Chen smiled sadly. "Not always, Liaison. We're not perfect. We failed again and again. We let genocides happen. We let tyrants rise. We made compromises that cost millions of lives. But we never stopped trying. We never looked at the darkness and said, 'This is simply how things are.' We kept fighting, kept building, kept believing that we could do better." She turned back to the fleet. "That's what you see here, Liaison. Not ships, not weapons,
A promise. A promise we made to ourselves 3 centuries ago. Never again. Vaithara stared at the human vessels. 15,000 ships, built over 40 years of exile. Built not for conquest, not for revenge, but for a promise made before humanity had even touched the stars.
"You are going to help us," she said. It was not a question.
We are going to stop the Veilthrix. Chen's voice was hard now, cold as the void between stars. Not for you, not for the Concord, for the same reason we do everything, because someone has to. Because if we don't, no one will.
And in return? In return, liaison, we ask nothing. We are not merchants trading lives for profit. We are not politicians seeking advantage. We are humans, and the Veilthrix have crossed a line that cannot be uncrossed.
Vaithara thought of Velcora, 3 billion souls consumed in a day. She thought of the 7th Fleet, dying in the void. She thought of her home world, where the old temples still stood, where her people still dreamed of the future they had been promised.
And she thought of the humans, the young species, the foolish species, the species that had been mocked, dismissed, cast out of galactic society like unwanted children. The species that had spent 40 years preparing for this moment.
"Thank you," she said. The words felt inadequate, but they were all she had. Chen placed a hand on her shoulder, a human gesture of comfort, one that Vaithara had only read about in xenological texts.
"Save your thanks, liaison. We haven't done anything yet." She smiled, and this time there was warmth in it. "But we will. That I can promise."
The next 3 days were a blur of activity. Vaithara found herself swept up in the machinery of human mobilization, and it was unlike anything she had ever witnessed. There were no grand speeches, no ceremonies, no dramatic declarations of war. There was simply movement. Quiet, efficient, inexorable movement. Ships that had been dark came to life, their running lights flickering on like awakening eyes. Supply convoys began flowing from the outer systems, carrying fuel and ammunition and spare parts. Soldiers, they called themselves Marines, moved through the corridors of Meridian in orderly formations, their faces calm, their steps measured. Everyone knew their role. Everyone knew their place. It was, Vaithara realized, a civilization that had been waiting for this moment. Not eagerly, not with bloodlust or anticipation, but with a quiet, patient readiness that spoke of long preparation and careful planning. On the second day, Dr. Webb found her in the observation lounge, watching the fleet assemble. "Impressive, isn't it?" he said, settling into the seat beside her. "It is. Overwhelming." Vaithara gestured at the swarm of vessels outside the viewport. "I have never seen anything like it. The coordination, the efficiency. It's as if every individual knows exactly what to do." "They do. We've been drilling for this for decades." Webb's eyes tracked a cruiser as it glided past. "Not this specific scenario, of course, but variations of it. We've wargamed every conceivable threat, developed contingencies for situations we hoped would never arise. When the Veilthrix emerged, it took us less than a day to adapt our plans to the new reality." "You wargamed against the Veilthrix?" "We wargamed against everything. Conventional fleets, swarm tactics, dimensional anomalies, even scenarios where we faced enemies that couldn't be killed by any weapon we possessed." He smiled faintly. "We're a paranoid species, liaison. It's one of our greatest strengths."
Vaithara considered this. "And how do you rate your chances against the Veilthrix?"
"Better than yours." The bluntness of the statement was startling, but Webb's tone carried no malice. "Your people relied on technological superiority. When that failed, you had nothing to fall back on. We've never had that luxury. We've always assumed our enemies would be smarter, faster, better equipped, so we learned to win through other means.
What means?
Webb leaned forward, his eyes never leaving the fleet. Adaptation, cooperation, sacrifice, the willingness to take hits, to absorb losses, to keep fighting even when victory seems impossible. It's not elegant, it's not pretty, but it works.
You speak of sacrifice. How many of your people will die in this war?
Millions, probably. Perhaps more. The words were delivered without flinching. We've made our peace with that, liaison. Every soldier out there knows the risks. They volunteered anyway. Volunteered? Vaithara shook her head. Among my people, military service is a duty assigned by birthright and aptitude. The concept of volunteering to die.
It's very human. Webb stood, stretching. We are a strange species, liaison. I won't pretend otherwise. But we are also, in our own way, a very old species. We carry the memories of everything we've survived, every war, every plague, every near-extinction event. Those memories shape us. They make us who we are.
He moved toward the door, then paused. You asked earlier what we are. I don't think I can give you a complete answer, but I can tell you this. We are survivors. Not because we're the strongest or the smartest or the most advanced, but because we refuse to give up. Because every time the universe has tried to kill us, we've found a way to keep going.
And you believe that will be enough against the Veilthrix?
Webb smiled, a strange, fierce expression that sent chills down Vaithara's spine.
Ask me again in a month, liaison. I think you'll find the answer illuminating.
On the third day, the fleet departed. Vaithara watched from the observation lounge as Battle Group Meridian moved out, 400 ships sliding through the void in perfect formation. They were joined by contingents from other stations, Battle Groups Horizon, Pinnacle, and Vanguard, until the local space was filled with human vessels, a river of metal and light flowing toward the distant stars. And that was only the beginning. Over the following weeks, reports filtered back to Meridian. Battle groups from across the Sol Compact were converging on Kethvari space. 37 in total, nearly 15,000 ships. They were joined by support fleets, logistics convoys, medical frigates, and engineering vessels. The humans were not just sending a military force, they were sending an entire civilization to war. Vaithara found herself consulting with human officers, sharing what she knew of Veilthrix tactics and Kethvari defenses. They listened with that same quiet attention, asking probing questions, taking careful notes. They never dismissed her knowledge, never condescended to her. They treated her as an equal, or perhaps more accurately, as a partner. It was a strange experience. She had spent 3 centuries as a cultural liaison, representing the wisdom and superiority of the Kethvari to younger races. She had grown accustomed to deference, to the assumption that her people's judgments were final. Now, for the first time, she found herself in the presence of a species that did not defer, that did not assume.
That simply was.
On the 17th day after the fleet's departure, Commander Chen summoned her to the command center. "We've made contact," Chen said without preamble. "First engagement at the Pyrean perimeter. Battle Group Horizon intercepted a Veilthrix advance force. 47 enemy vessels destroyed. No losses on our side."
Vaithara stared at her. No losses?
One cruiser took minor damage. It's already been repaired. Chen pulled up a tactical display. The Veilthrix weren't expecting resistance. They'd grown accustomed to sweeping through Kethvari defenses without challenge. When our ships hit them, they didn't know how to respond.
That will change. They will adapt.
We're counting on it. Chen's smile was thin. Every time they adapt, they reveal more about themselves, their tactics, their capabilities, their weaknesses. We have been fighting blind so far, but that's changing.
You're using the engagements to gather intelligence. We're using everything to gather intelligence. The Veilthrix are powerful, but they're not invincible. Nothing is. We just have to find the cracks. Vaithara thought of the Seventh Fleet, destroyed in a single day. The greatest naval force in Kethvari history, reduced to debris in the time it took to prepare a formal dinner. My people tried to find the cracks, she said quietly. We failed.
Chen's expression softened. Your people fought with honor, Liaison. They died protecting their worlds and their families, but they fought alone. That's the difference now. You're not alone anymore.
The days blurred together. 1 week, 2, 3.
Reports arrived in a constant stream. Engagements at the Pyrrhian perimeter, skirmishes in the outer reaches, a major battle at the Velcora debris field where human forces ambushed a Veilthrix supply convoy and destroyed 200 vessels in a single coordinated strike.
The losses began to climb. Human ships, human lives. But for every human vessel lost, the Veilthrix lost 10, 20, sometimes more. And the humans kept coming. More battle groups arrived, more support fleets, more soldiers. The Sol Compact was pouring resources into the war at a rate that staggered Vaithara's comprehension. Where were they finding the ships, the weapons, the people? On the 42nd day, she asked Dr. Webb.
We've been at war before, Liaison, he said simply. Many times. We know how to scale up, how to convert our economy, our industry, our entire society to a war footing. It's not pleasant, but we're good at it.
But the numbers, the sheer volume of what you're producing. We have 100 billion people across 200 systems. Every one of them is contributing. Factory workers, engineers, scientists, farmers, even the artists are doing their part, producing propaganda to keep morale high. He smiled wryly. War is terrible, Liaison, but it brings out something in humans. A unity, a focus that we rarely achieve in peacetime. We become more than the sum of our parts.
Vaithara thought about this, about a species that thrived in crisis, that became stronger, not weaker, when faced with existential threat.
She thought about the wars in human history, the famines, the plagues, the countless disasters that should have destroyed them, and somehow hadn't.
And she began to understand.
Humanity was not dangerous because they were aggressive. They were dangerous because they were resilient, because they had been forged in the fires of their own near extinction again and again until they had become something harder than any species the Kethvari had ever encountered.
They were survivors, and survivors, by definition, were very hard to kill.
On the 58th day, the tide turned.
Vaithara was in the command center when the reports came in. A massive Veilthrix fleet, over 3,000 vessels, had been intercepted at the edge of Kethvari core space. The humans had met them with 6 battle groups, just over 2,000 ships.
They were outnumbered. The battle lasted 14 hours.
When it was over, the Veilthrix fleet was gone. Not retreated, not damaged, gone. Destroyed to the last vessel, their debris scattered across a light year of space like the ashes of a funeral pyre.
Human losses,
412 ships, 93,000 personnel. Vaithara watched the casualty figures scroll across the display, trying to comprehend them. 93,000 humans dead in a single battle, more than had died in all of Kathvari history's minor conflicts combined.
And the humans were celebrating.
Not celebrating the deaths, she realized, celebrating the victory. Celebrating the fact that they had done what no force in the galaxy had ever done before, broken a Veilthrix armada, completely and utterly. Commander Chen found her in the observation lounge that evening, staring at the stars.
You seem troubled, liaison.
93,000, Vaithara whispered. 93,000 of your people dead, and you are happy? Chen moved to stand beside her. We're not happy, liaison. We mourn every loss. Every name on that list was someone's child, someone's parent, someone's friend. We feel the weight of their sacrifice more than you can imagine.
Then why do you seem so calm? Chen smiled sadly. Because we've been here before. Not this exact situation, but situations like it. We've lost millions in single battles, billions in single wars. We've watched our cities burn and our nations fall, and we've learned that grief, while necessary, cannot be allowed to paralyze us.
How can you bear it? The weight of so much death.
Chen was quiet for a long moment. When she spoke again, her voice was soft. We bear it together, liaison. That's the secret. That's what your people never understood about us. You saw our violence, our wars, our capacity for destruction. You saw us as fractured, divided, incapable of unity. But you missed the other half of the equation. When it truly matters, when the survival of our species is at stake, we come together in ways that even we don't fully understand.
She turned to face Vaithara. Those 93,000 soldiers didn't die alone. They died surrounded by their comrades, fighting for a cause they believed in. They died knowing that their sacrifice would be remembered, honored, and avenged. That knowledge, that certainty, makes the unbearable bearable.
Vaithara thought about her own people, about the Seventh Fleet dying in the void above Velcora. Had they felt that certainty? Had they known that their sacrifice would matter? Or had they died believing that their people would simply crumble without them?
You are strange creatures, she said at last. Strange and terrible and wonderful.
Chen laughed, a genuine laugh, warm and unexpectedly gentle. We've been called worse, liaison. Much worse.
The war continued.
The Veilthrix, reeling from their first major defeat, attempted to regroup. They brought in reinforcements from the galactic core, fresh swarms, untouched by the battles that had decimated their vanguard. They adapted their tactics, learning from their losses, trying to counter the human strategies that had proved so devastating.
The humans adapted faster. Every engagement taught them something new. Every battle refined their understanding of the enemy. They developed new weapons, new formations, new approaches that the Veilthrix had no answer for. And always, always they pressed forward. By the 90th day, the Veilthrix had been pushed back to the Pyrene perimeter. By the 120th day, human forces had liberated the Pyrene cluster itself, establishing defensive positions on the 12 worlds that had been conquered months before. The populations were gone, of course, consumed. But the worlds remained, and the humans set about fortifying them with the same quiet efficiency they brought to everything else.
Vaithara visited one of those worlds, Pyrene 4, on the 135th day. She had expected devastation, ruin,
the scars of Veilthric's consumption. What she found was activity. Human engineers were rebuilding the planet's infrastructure, constructing new power plants and water treatment facilities and housing complexes. Human scientists were studying the soil, the atmosphere, the native ecosystems that had survived the brief Veilthric's occupation. Human soldiers patrolled the perimeters, watchful and alert, ready for any renewed attack.
And human civilians were arriving. Colonists, settlers, families with children, ready to start new lives on a world that had been a graveyard just months before.
"I don't understand," Vaethora said to Dr. Webb, who had accompanied her on the visit. "These worlds are not yours. They are Kethvari territory, or they were. Why are you rebuilding them? Why are your people settling here?"
Webb smiled. "Because empty worlds are vulnerable worlds, Liaison. And because, frankly, your people aren't in any position to repopulate them. You've lost too many. Your birth rates are too low. If we left these worlds empty, the Veilthric's would simply return."
But what happens when the war is over? Will you give them back?
That's a question for diplomats and politicians, Liaison, above my pay grade. Webb's expression grew more serious. But I can tell you this. We're not here to conquer. We're not here to replace your people. We're here to fill the gaps, to provide the bodies and the resources your civilization needs to survive.
"And if we cannot repay you, if we have nothing left to offer, then you'll owe us a very large favor." Webb's smile returned. "We are a patient species, Liaison. We can wait." Vaethora looked out at the construction crews, the settlers, the children playing in the shadow of alien ruins. A human child, a small female with dark hair and bright eyes, waved at her, grinning. Vaethora waved back. The final battle came on the 182nd day. The Veilthric's, desperate and enraged, had massed their entire remaining fleet at the edge of the galactic core. Intelligence reports suggested over 10,000 vessels, the largest concentration of military force the galaxy had ever seen. The humans met them with 27 battle groups, 11,000 ships, crewed by over 30 million personnel, the largest military deployment in human history.
Vaethora was there.
She had requested permission to accompany the fleet, to witness whatever happened next. Commander Chen had agreed, assigning her to the command ship of Battle Group Pinnacle, the dreadnought Unconquered Sun.
The bridge was quiet as they approached the Veilthric's position. Officers moved between stations, checking readings, confirming coordinates. There was none of the tension Vaethora would have expected, no fear, no nervousness, just calm, focused preparation.
"Contact in 15 minutes, the tactical officer reported. "Enemy formation is holding steady. They're waiting for us." Admiral Helena Vasquez nodded. She was a small woman, unremarkable in appearance, but Vaethora had learned to read humans well enough by now to see the steel beneath her surface. "Fleet status?"
All battle groups in position, weapons charged, point defense active. We're ready.
"Good." Vasquez turned to Vaethora. "Liaison, any final insights you'd like to share about our enemy?" Vaethora hesitated. She had shared everything she knew, tactical data, behavioral analysis, speculation about Veilthric's psychology. But now, on the edge of the greatest battle in galactic history, she felt she should say something more.
"They do not understand you," she said at last.
"The Veilthric's. They have faced many enemies, but none like you. They expect you to break, to falter, to behave as every other species has behaved when faced with their overwhelming force."
And we won't.
"No." Vaethora met the Admiral's eyes. "You won't. That is what makes you terrifying."
Vasquez smiled, a thin, fierce expression. Good. Let's show them just how terrifying we can be.
The battle began.
Vaithara had witnessed naval engagements before, had watched Kethvari fleets maneuver and fight and die, but she had never seen anything like this.
The human fleet moved as a single organism, 11,000 ships acting in perfect coordination. They swept toward the Veilthrix position in a crescent formation, weapons blazing, shields flaring. The void lit up with the fire of 1,000 suns.
The Veilthrix responded with everything they had. Energy beams, mass drivers, swarm missiles. They threw waves of destruction at the human fleet, expecting it to shatter like every other force they had faced.
The humans absorbed the barrage and kept coming.
Ships died. Cruisers, destroyers, frigates. The casualty figures climbed with sickening speed. 10,000, 20,000, 50,000. Human lives extinguished in the fires of war.
And still they came.
The Veilthrix lines began to buckle. They were accustomed to enemies who retreated, who broke, who valued individual survival over collective victory. The humans did not retreat. They did not break. They pressed forward with a relentless, methodical fury that the Veilthrix had no answer for.
Admiral Vasquez stood at the center of the bridge, issuing orders in a calm, measured voice. She did not flinch when the unconquered sun shuddered from a near miss. She did not falter when reports came in of ships lost, of squadrons destroyed. She simply adjusted, adapted, and pressed forward.
Vaithara watched her and understood.
This was what humanity truly was. Not the violence the Kethvari had feared, not the chaos they had predicted, but something far more profound. A species that had learned, through millennia of struggle, to face the darkness together, to stand firm when everything urged them to flee, to keep fighting, not because they were certain of victory, but because fighting was who they were.
12 hours into the battle, the Veilthrix fleet began to collapse.
Their formations crumbled. Their coordination failed. Ships began to flee, scattering toward the galactic core, abandoning their positions in a desperate bid for survival.
The humans gave chase.
They hunted the retreating Veilthrix with a cold, methodical precision that was almost more terrifying than the battle itself. Every ship that tried to escape was tracked, intercepted, destroyed. There would be no survivors, no remnants to rebuild, to return, to threaten the galaxy again.
When the last Veilthrix vessel fell silent, Vaithara wept. She wept for her own people, for the billions who had died before help arrived. She wept for the humans who had sacrificed so much, for the millions who would never return home. She wept for the galaxy itself, transformed forever by what had happened here.
And she wept with relief, because for the first time in nearly 2 years, she believed that her species might actually survive. Admiral Vasquez found her in the observation lounge afterward, staring at the stars.
"It's over," the Admiral said quietly. "The Veilthrix are finished. They may have survivors hiding in the galactic core, but their military capability is destroyed. They'll never threaten anyone again."
"How many?" Vaithara's voice was hoarse. "How many of your people?"
"Approximately 2 million in this battle alone." Vasquez's voice did not waver. "Perhaps 10 million throughout the war. We won't have final figures for weeks." 10 million. The number was staggering. More than Vaithara's own species had lost in 1,000 years of minor conflicts. "I don't know how to thank you," she said.
I don't know if thanks are even possible."
"They're not necessary." Vasquez moved to stand beside her. "We didn't do this for thanks, Liaison. We did it because it was right, because someone had to."
The galaxy laughed at you. My people laughed at you. We called you children, savages, monsters.
We know. And yet you came anyway. You saved us anyway."
Vasquez was quiet for a long moment. When she spoke again, her voice was soft. "Do you know what the greatest lesson of human history is, Liaison? It's not about war or conquest or technological advancement. It's about choice. Every generation, every civilization, every individual faces moments where they must choose who they want to be. We can choose to be the monsters your people feared, or we can choose to be something else."
And what did you choose?
Vasquez smiled, a tired, sad, gentle smile. "We chose to be the ones who show up, the ones who fight when others flee, the ones who refuse to let the darkness win no matter the cost." She turned to face Vathara fully. "Your people laughed at us, Liaison. They dismissed us. They tried to contain us. And we're not going to pretend that didn't hurt, that it doesn't still hurt. But we're also not going to let that define us. We are more than your worst assumptions. We always have been."
Vathara looked at the human admiral, this small, fragile creature who had just commanded the largest military victory in galactic history, who had sent millions of her own people to their deaths without flinching, who had faced the most terrifying enemy the galaxy had ever known and simply refused to lose.
"You were never children," Vathara said quietly. "We were the children, arrogant and blind, playing at wisdom, while the real adults were building something we couldn't even imagine."
"That's kind of you to say, Liaison, but the truth is simpler than that." Vasquez turned back to the stars. "We were never better than you, or worse. We were just different. We learned different lessons. We faced different challenges. We became what our history made us."
And what did your history make you? Vasquez considered the question for a long moment.
"Stubborn," she said at last, "enduring, capable of terrible things and wonderful things in equal measure, but above all, hopeful. No matter how dark things get, no matter how hopeless the situation seems, we never stop believing that tomorrow might be better. That's the one thing the Valthrix couldn't understand. They saw our losses and expected us to surrender. They saw our pain and expected us to break. But every loss just made us more determined. Every pain just hardened our resolve." She smiled again, and this time there was something fierce in it. "They laughed at humanity, Liaison. They looked at our small fleet and our short history and our fragile bodies, and they laughed, just like your people laughed 40 years ago, just like every species in the galaxy has laughed at some point. And now," Vasquez gestured at the viewport, at the debris field that stretched across the void, the remains of 10,000 Valthrix vessels, destroyed by the species they had dismissed as insignificant.
Now they're not laughing anymore.
Vathara returned to Kethvari space 3 weeks later aboard a human transport ship. She had expected to find ruins, devastation, the aftermath of a war that had nearly destroyed her people. What she found was hope. Human engineers were working alongside Kirithvari survivors, rebuilding cities and infrastructure. Human doctors were treating the wounded, training local medical staff, sharing technologies that accelerated healing beyond anything her people had known. Human diplomats were meeting with the remnants of her government, discussing the future, laying the groundwork for a new era of cooperation. It was not occupation,
It was not charity, it was partnership, the kind of equal, respectful partnership that the Kethvari had never offered the humans. Counselor Mathan met her at the spaceport on the home world. He looked different than she remembered, older, wearier, but also somehow more alive. There was a light in his eyes that she had not seen in years.
"You succeeded," he said simply.
"They succeeded," Vathara replied. "I just asked."
"You did more than ask, old friend. You gave them a reason to believe we were worth saving." He clasped her hands in the traditional gesture of gratitude. "The Council wishes to see you. There are discussions taking place about the future, about our place in the new galactic order."
"The Concord?"
Mathan laughed, a bitter, rueful sound. "The Concord is finished, Vathara. The Thrill Kai have withdrawn permanently. The Asari are facing their own reckoning. Their collaboration with the Veiltrix has not been forgiven. The Vornathi, well, the Vornathi are the Vornathi. They'll wait to see which way the wind blows, as they always have."
"And us?"
"That's what the Council wishes to discuss." Mathan began walking toward the exit, and Vathara fell into step beside him. "The humans have made an offer, a formal alliance, not a concord, but something new, something built on different principles." "What principles?" "Equality, mutual defense, cooperation without hierarchy." Mathan's voice was soft. "They're calling it the Galactic Compact, and they want us to be founding members."
Vathara stopped walking. "After everything we did to them?"
"Yes." Mathan turned to face her. "I asked their ambassador the same question. Do you know what she said?"
"What?"
"She said, the galaxy is too big and too dangerous for grudges. We can either spend the next 1,000 years nursing old wounds, or we can build something new together. We choose to build." Vathara stood in silence, absorbing this. She thought about the 40 years of exile, the embargo, the mockery, the systematic attempt to strangle humanity before they could become a threat. And she thought about the humans who had come anyway, who had fought and bled and died for a species that had treated them as less than nothing. "They are remarkable creatures," she said at last.
"They are," Mathan smiled, "and we would do well to learn from them."
They walked together toward the council chambers, past rubble that was being cleared, past buildings that were being rebuilt, past Kethvari and humans working side by side in the warm light of a sun that would still rise tomorrow.
Vathara thought about the title she had carried for 300 years, Cultural Liaison to the Galactic Concord, a representative of an ancient and arrogant civilization that had believed itself the pinnacle of galactic development. That civilization was gone now. The arrogance had burned away in the fires of the Veiltrix War, leaving only survivors, humbled, wounded, but alive. Alive, because a young species had refused to let them die. She thought about Admiral Vasquez's words. They laughed at humanity. Now they're not laughing anymore. No, Vathara thought. They weren't laughing. They were learning. And perhaps, in time, they would become worthy of the gift they had been given. The council chamber was warm when she entered, filled with the soft glow of ancient crystals and the murmur of quiet conversation. The surviving counselors sat in a loose circle, their faces grave but hopeful, and at the center of the room, standing with the patient stillness of those who have learned to wait, was a human delegation. Vathara recognized Commander Chen among them. The human woman smiled when she saw Vathara, a warm, genuine expression that spoke of respect and perhaps the beginnings of friendship. Vathara smiled back.
Then she took her place among her people and prepared to help build a future that none of them had ever imagined. A future where humanity stood not as children or monsters or savages, but as partners, as equals, as the stubborn, enduring, hopeful species who had looked at a galaxy that dismissed them and said simply, "We refuse to give up."
The Kethvari had sailed the silence between stars for 11,000 years. They had watched empires rise and fall, had catalogued the births and deaths of civilizations, had grown old and tired and certain of their place in the cosmic order. But they had never truly understood.
Now, finally, they were beginning to learn.
And somewhere in the vast, cold, indifferent universe, the stars continued to burn, ancient lights that had watched the rise and fall of 1,000 species, that would watch the rise and fall of 1,000 more. But for the first time in a very long time, those stars were witness to something new.
Not conquest, not destruction, not the endless cycle of arrogance and collapse that had defined galactic history since time immemorial.
Hope.
The humans had brought hope, and the galaxy would never be the same.